Hey guys, welcome back to Based MMA. In this video, I'm going to be discussing my personal most overrated fighters in the UFC. And before I get started, please make sure to like and subscribe, guys. Comment down below. Let me know your thoughts on these five fighters that I personally believe are some of the most overrated fighters in the UFC. I know some of you are going to disagree with some of these people, but I think I'm going to make valid arguments for every single one of these fighters being a little bit overrated, you know what I'm saying? And before I get started with these five fighters, I'm not saying that any of these five fighters are bad fighters whatsoever, but these are just fighters that I believe the MMA community kind of overhypes, and when they talk about them, I don't necessarily agree with them. Either they kind of make them seem too invincible or like they're dominating their opponents, and I just don't agree with it. And honestly, prior to the Sean O'Malley knockout over Aljamain Sterling, I felt like Aljamain Sterling was one of those people that was a little bit overrated. Don't get me wrong, he had wins over a lot of good fighters, but those performances were not like dominant performances. They were like split decision. TJ Dillashaw had one arm, and I know that when I say that, it kind of sounds like I'm discrediting Aljamain Sterling's wins in the bantamweight division, but I'm really not. I'm really not. I honestly believe that Aljamain Sterling was becoming a little bit overrated prior to the Sean O'Malley fight, where I think a lot of people kind of started to see him as this dominant force when he was, winning these very, very close fights with very good opponents. But yeah, guys, I guess I would put Aljamain Sterling as like an honorable mention. But let's start off this video. Most overrated fighters in the UFC. And I'm going to start off at number 5 with Merab Dvalishvili. I hope I probably butchered I probably butchered his last name. Merab, guys. I do believe that Merab is a bit overrated by the MMA community, especially because of his performance over Peter Yan, where he attempted so many takedowns. But rewatching that fight a couple days ago, I realized that even though Merab was attempting a lot of takedowns, he wasn't even doing anything with the takedowns besides just give Peter Yan the fear of the takedown. And Peter Yan was pretty much getting up from every takedown, and Merab was kind of using that to land like good strikes on Peter Yan, but Peter Yan was never hurt. I feel like Merab kind of has pillow hands, and he was attempting a lot of takedowns, but I also think like Merab versus Peter Yan stylistically is a very good fight for Merab. Why? Because Peter Yan tends to be a slow starter, tends to not have a lot of output. You know what I'm saying? He tends to shell up. Peter Yan tends to shell up a lot. So I felt like stylistically, in hindsight, it was a very good stylistic fight for Merab. And I feel like because of that performance, don't get me wrong, Merab showed to have incredible cardio. I just feel like the MMA community has overhyped Merab to say like, no, this guy's the next champion. He could beat anybody. This nightmare matchup for Sean O'Malley, nightmare matchup. And let's talk about that matchup, because I do not believe that Merab is the nightmare matchup for Sean O'Malley. In my opinion, I feel like Corey Sandhagen is actually the nightmare matchup to Sean O'Malley. But a lot of people out there, a lot of these MMA fans, they like to throw around that Merab is like he's the next up and comer. No one can beat this guy. And don't get me wrong, Merab is on a good win streak. Some of his losses are, honestly, he probably could have won those split decision losses that he has on his record. But I just don't see Merab as like this dominant force. In fact, I just think that Sean O'Malley would knock out Merab, guys. That's my hot take right here. I think Sean O'Malley would knock out Merab. And I just feel like he's become a little bit overrated. Don't get me wrong, he has amazing cardio, but this is not a guy that has like amazing hands. He kind of does get sloppy on the feet, and I felt like with Sean O'Malley, his boxing, his hands, his distance management, his footwork, I think he might be able to give Merab some problems, just like how he gave Aljamain certain problems. And I just feel like Merab has become a little bit overrated because of that Peter Yan fight. Don't get me wrong, I was one of those people that picked Peter Yan to beat Merab, and I was incredibly impressed with his performance, but also disappointed in Peter Yan's performance. But going back to rewatch that fight, watching that fight back with like no emotions, I realized that like Merab, even though he was like attempting a lot of takedowns, it's not like he was getting control time or he was threatening with a submission or that, you know, he was really hurting Yan on the feet. You know, I mean, he did shut his eye or anything, but like, it wasn't like Peter Yan was getting knocked down or anything like that. So, you know, if Merab fights some of these contenders that are very durable, have a lot of power, even if he does get taken down, like if they land a good shot from Merab has a very good chance of getting knocked out. Do you know what I'm saying? And somebody like Sean O'Malley, like I felt like Aljamain Sterling was a harder task for Sean O'Malley than Merab, because Aljamain Sterling actually has submission threat, actually has ground and pound threat. When Aljamain Sterling takes someone down, he controls you. Like, you're not getting up. It's gonna be very hard to get up. As in with Merab, he kind of uses it to open up his striking and to kind of gas you out and just, you know, make it an MMA fight, make it kind of dirty. I guess some people like to compare Merab to the Colby Covington of the bantamweight division, which I know a lot of people believe that Colby Covington's a bit overrated. So there's that, but I just think Merab has become a bit overrated. Don't get me wrong, he's an amazing fighter, and I'm not saying he doesn't have the potential to become a champion. But like, let's look back at that Jose Aldo fight. Like, he didn't dominate Jose Aldo. He just clinched up and stalled the fight. Like, that's not a domination kind of performance. Like, I don't see that. And I'm just like, man, this guy is pretty good at stalling and attempting takedowns. But I don't see this guy as this dominant force and this next future champion. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. I just felt like he got a bit overhyped, guys. So for that reason, he's at my number 5. Now moving on to my number 4, Paulo Costa. And I know that a lot of MMA fans are starting to see that Paulo Costa is a bit overrated. And I know this might be controversial because some of you are going to say, well, Paulo Costa is not overrated. Not a lot of people, you know, say that this guy's an amazing fighter. But I've seen, guys, some crazy takes that Paulo Costa will destroy Hamza Chimaev. And don't get me wrong, they're about to fight in October. But Paulo Costa's resume is really bad, guys. Really bad. He's coming off a win over Luke Rockhold, where he went to a decision with a retired Luke Rockhold, and every time Luke Rockhold would let go of his hands, would land clean on Paulo Costa. Did not look great against Luke Rockhold. A retired Luke Rockhold, like I said, lost to Marvin Vettori. You're getting outstruck by Marvin Vettori, where you missed weight, where you didn't even have to cut weight. You went into that fight heavy. Marvin Vettori went into that fight weak, thinking that he was going to cut weight. So Paulo Costa had an advantage there, and he still got outstruck by Marvin Vettori. If you're getting outstruck by Marvin Vettori, somebody that a lot of us consider mediocre in the middleweight division, then you're not a high caliber middleweight. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not a high caliber middleweight. And even he looked terrible against Israel Adesanya. And I get it. It's Israel Adesanya, great striker, yada yada. But still, man, he put one of the worst performances against Israel Adesanya. Probably the worst one besides maybe Robert Whittaker won. But even like, prior to that, I mean, he fought Yoel Romero where he won a decision. And I've gone back to rewatch that fight, guys. And I really do believe that Yoel Romero won that fight 29-28. But, you know, Paulo Costa had some moments, but the guy just tends to gas out a lot in his fights. He's not this knockout, you know, fighter that people hyped him up to be like, oh, Paulo Costa, look at those muscles. He can knock anybody out. But no, the guy's more of a volume striker. And he's not really knocking out his opponents. I mean, you know, his last KO was against Uriah Hall in 2018, guys. How long ago is that? Like 5 years ago? That's so long ago. Like, this guy's not a knockout artist. Also, the guy's incredibly inactive. So I'm just tired of like the UFC kind of making it seem like this guy's a huge star and that this guy's like a good UFC fighter for these new up-and-comers to be tested on. Like, to be honest, like, I feel like Paulo Costa is not even a top 10 middleweight these days, and pretty much has been like holding on to his ranking by not fighting, I guess. But yeah, I feel like, even though I feel like a lot of MMA not fighters, a lot of MMA fans are starting to see that Paulo Costa is not that good, I still think that the guy's a bit overrated, and for that reason, he's at my number 4. Now, moving on to number 3. Ooh, I think this is gonna be a controversial one. It's about to get spicy. I think Leon Edwards is a bit overrated, guys. I think he's a little bit overrated, and this is a guy, I believe that he's going to beat Colby Covington. If they do end up fighting this year, I think he's going to end up beating Colby Covington. But I still think he's overrated, guys. I still think he's overrated. Don't get me wrong. I rooted for this guy against both Usman fights. the second fight in the trilogy. But I still think this guy's overrated, man. Don't get me wrong. He landed the head kick KO against Kamaru Usman. But besides that, this guy's a decision king. Like, this guy also hadn't KO'd anybody since 2018 against Peter Sobata. Went to a decision with Donald Cerrone. Went to a decision with Gunnar Nelson. Went to a decision with RDA. Don't get me wrong, RDA is pretty durable. Went to a decision with Nate Diaz where he almost got knocked out and finished in round number 5. And then in that second Usman fight, he was getting dominated prior to the head kick KO that he landed. Now, even in the trilogy, right? Because I'm not going to judge him based on, you know, these old fights that Leon Edwards had. I'm going to judge him also on his most recent performance, which is in the trilogy. I wasn't really that impressed by Leon Edwards, guys. Like, yes, don't get me wrong. He was landing really good body kicks, landed this really good knee on Kamaru Usman, was catching Kamaru Usman, but most of that fight, the story of that fight was the leg kicks that Leon Edwards landed on Kamaru Usman. But after that Edwards versus Usman fight, you don't come out saying like, wow, Leon Edwards is dominant force in the welterweight division. No, you come out saying, wow, Kamaru Usman is washed. Wow, Kamaru Usman is not the same after that head kick knockout loss. You know what I'm saying? So I just look back and I watched some of Leon Edwards' performances, and the guy, I mean, he cheated up a lot in that trilogy against Kamaru Usman. The guy literally grabbed the cage, like cheated badly. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad Leon Edwards is champion, but I think he's a little bit overrated. I don't think he is a guy that has knockout power. Don't get me wrong, he has crisp striking. But I wouldn't say like Leon Edwards is like a guy that hurts you. He's just a guy that mixes it up, has really good grappling, very well-rounded fighter. But I just think he's become a little bit overrated. And I don't think that this guy is going to be champion for very long. If he does end up beating Colby Covington, like I see him losing to guys like Shavkat Ramonov. I know Hamza Chimaev is moving up, but I think Hamza Chimaev would have destroyed Leon Edwards. And I just don't see this big threat in the striking that a lot of people see when they think about Leon Edwards. You know what I'm saying? And I just think he's a typical British fighter, a UK fighter that becomes really overrated. And I could see Leon Edwards getting knocked out or controlled on the ground. Like, I think Islam Makhachev would absolutely destroy Leon Edwards. And I just think that he's become a little bit overrated since that head kick KO. If you go back and watch his previous performances, don't get me wrong, he was beating these guys dominantly, but he wasn't like hurting them. And I don't know, I just don't see this guy as like a, I don't want to say like scary champion, but a guy that really hurts you. You know what I'm saying? Just a guy that's very well rounded. I don't think this guy also has the best of cardios. I think his cardio is a bit questionable, and I think that chin is also a bit questionable. And even though I do believe that he's going to be able to beat Colby Covington, like I still believe that Colby Covington has a really good chance. Even though Colby Covington hasn't fought in over a year, you know, Colby Covington has a chance to make that fight dirty. And I don't know. I feel like Leon Edwards is like one of those fighters that I don't want to say he doesn't like to fight. I don't want to say he doesn't like to fight, but like, I feel like he lacks a little bit of grit. And like, comment down below. Maybe you guys agree with me. Like, I know a lot of people are gonna say, well, what about that 5th round against Kamaru Usman where he was able to pull the head kick KO out of nowhere? I mean, yeah, I guess he was able to do that, but imagine he doesn't land that head kick KO. This terrible performance, terrible title performance where he got dominated. So you know what I'm saying? So for that reason, Leon Edwards is at my number 3 for overrated fighters in the UFC. And by the way, guys, this is not a ranking. I'm just talking about 5 fighters. I'm not saying that one's more overrated than the other. I'm just talking about these 5 fighters, just to FYI. I probably should have said that at the beginning of the video. Now, moving on to another fighter that kind of got exposed in his last fight, and that is Beneil Dariush, guys. Prior to this fight, prior to the Charles Oliveira versus Beneil Dariush fight, I saw a lot of people hyping up Beneil Dariush. And in fact, I even thought, even though I picked Charles Oliveira to finish him, I felt like I was overhyping Beneil Dariush. But I didn't truly start to see that this guy was becoming a bit overhyped until I went back to rewatch his fights prior to the Charles Oliveira fight to try to get some tape, because I felt like I was watching all these MMA content, all these MMA creators, and they were talking about Beneil Dariush, and I was like, man, am I misremembering? Like, I don't remember him being that dominant and looking that great in his performances. Like, yeah, he was beating these guys, but look who he was outstriking. He was outstriking Gamrot. Come on, guys. Gamrot has literally no striking. Him, you know, dropping Gamrot doesn't mean you're a good striker. And even you go back to his fights prior to that. I mean, he beat Tony Ferguson by laying on top of him and you know, having some ground control. But it wasn't like Beneil Dariush was out striking Tony Ferguson or anything like that. And you know, went to a decision with Diego Ferreira. You know, he did have like a good performance over Drucker Klose, which is like the highlight win where he got hurt and then was able to come back and TK and KO the guy, which was pretty impressive. And I'm not saying the guy's not a good fighter, but I felt like his striking prior to the Charles Oliveira matchup was incredibly overrated. And because of his striking becoming overrated, I felt like he was becoming overrated because a lot of people were saying, "Oh, he's gonna walk through Charles Oliveira, and you know he's potentially the next biggest threat to Islam Makhachev," which I thought was insane. Well, I thought it was an insane statement to make based on his resume. Like, don't get me wrong, he had a good win streak, but if you look at the guys like he was doing it to, I mean, Tony Ferguson, those two lost, Gamrot, you know what I'm saying, that arguably lost to Armin Saryukin, stuff like that. So I felt like Beneil Dariush just became very overrated, and now that he's lost, I felt like all those fans went into hiding. Now you don't hear anything from Beneil Dariush, but I won't forget. I'm not gonna forget that you guys did hype up Beneil Dariush prior to the Charles Oliveira fight. For that reason, he's on this list. Now moving on, last but not least, I am biased for this one, guys. I can't lie. I can't lie. I can't pretend to be objective for this one. Israel Adesanya is incredibly overrated, and I know that a lot of you guys are Israel Adesanya fans, and are me commenting below, "Oh, well, he just knocked out Alex Pereira. He's not overrated. Look what he did. He knocked him out in the second round." But like, let's take a look at his resume. Let's break down his fights, guys. Prior to him winning the title, I think Israel Adesanya was, you know, I kind of enjoyed the way he fought. You know, you could tell he put it on the line. For example, the Kevin Gastelum fight. Some of my Spanish came out there. The Kevin Gastelum fight, that was a pretty entertaining fight. Um, you know, when he won the title against Robert Whittaker, incredible performance. But then you have performances like him versus Yoel Romero, where nothing happened. 48 significant strikes landed in a 5-round fight. Embarrassing. Has a good performance of Paulo Costa, but like, let's be honest, like Paulo Costa, I mean, Paulo Costa, like, is did we just overhype that guy because he had muscles and he looks like a model and he looks like the Hulk? Because I think that's exactly what ended up happening. So, you know, then Israel Adesanya beat up Paulo Costa, who I don't think beat Yoel Romero. And then after that, he tried to move up to light heavyweight to get the title. Lost to Jan Blachowicz in a pretty competitive fight where I thought he won 2 rounds, but you know, he lost. Like, he lost that fight. Like, it wasn't like a split decision or could go either way. Like, no, he clearly lost against Jan Blachowicz where he was taken down. And then he put this terrible performance against Marvin Vettori in the second fight where I thought that fight, the second Marvin Vettori fight, is one of those fights where I remember watching it live and I was like, man, Marvin Vettori isn't doing so bad. But then after the fight, people were like, Adesanya just dominated Marvin Vettori. And I was like, what? Did we watch the same fight? Because I felt like Marvin Vettori, like, I felt like the rounds were close. Even though you could make an argument that Adesanya won every single round, I felt like the rounds in that fight were close. And then the second Robert Whittaker fight, people thought he lost. I thought he lost 3 rounds to 2. You know, I thought he lost 2, 4, and 5. So yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, terrible performance against Marvin Vettori in the second fight. Arguably lost against Robert Whittaker in the second fight. Another boring fight against Jared Cannonier where he couldn't even finish Jared Cannonier or do anything to Jared Cannonier. And then lost to Alex Pereira in November where, you know, he was winning the fight, probably on his way to winning a decision, and then gets finished in the 4th round. But he was getting hurt by Alex Pereira prior to that. And then obviously he's coming off his round 2 KO over Alex Pereira, where I felt like prior to him getting the KO, he was on his way to losing. You know what I'm saying? Like, he wasn't looking all that great in my opinion. So I feel like even though on paper, looking at his resume, it looks impressive, when you actually go back and rewatch every fight, you realize that this guy is not as good as the UFC hypes up. and as the fan base likes to talk about him, the best striker. Really, bro, you're the best striker? You can't even put like a super dominant performance over Marvin Vettori, where like every round was kind of close. He actually took you down like 4 times. And then that second Robert Whittaker fight also, you really couldn't dominate him. For that, I guess I'll excuse it because it's Robert Whittaker, who we thought was one of the best in the middleweight division. I mean, he is one of the best in the middleweight division, but also I think Robert Whittaker was a bit overhyped. I probably should have put him on this list, to be totally honest with you. But yeah, guys, I just think Israel Adesanya is a bit overrated. Don't get me wrong. Israel Adesanya has a lot of haters and has a lot of fans. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not a fan of Israel Adesanya, but I'm also aware that it's not like, oh, this guy has off a bunch of fans and a little bit of haters. No, I know that Israel Adesanya also has a lot of haters, but even that, like, I still think the guy's overrated. Like, I feel like his MMA skills are a bit overrated. I don't think he has the best takedown defense, and I don't think there's been a fighter that has been able to expose that yet, besides Jan Blachowicz. But a lot of people don't pay attention to that because they're like, oh well, he tried to move up to another division. It was a guy that was heavier. But I still believe that, like, if a good wrestler, like if Bo Nickel is able to improve his striking, get a little bit more experience, I think he could give Israel Adesanya a run for his money. I think Hamza Chimaev would probably be the nightmare matchup for Israel Adesanya as well. So for that reason, guys, I think Israel Adesanya is one of the most overrated fighters in the UFC, guys. So please comment down below if you agree with these 5 fighters. I know that you guys are going to disagree with some of these. And if you think of other fighters that you think are overrated in the MMA community, please make sure to comment down below. Please make sure to keep it respectful. I hope the audio is a little bit better for this video, guys. I hope you guys are having a good day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.